They came with an army that could shatter planets, demanding humanity's surrender without hesitation. But Earth didn't bow. Instead, we gave them something far worse, a challenge. One human standing alone in a galactic arena against the most fearsome warrior the galaxy had ever known. The result? A moment the entire universe would never forget. The day Earth said no loudly, and with the strength of 1,000 worlds behind it. I never thought it would come to this. I had been a diplomat for years, working tirelessly behind the scenes to ensure that Earth remained a peaceful, relatively unnoticed corner of the galaxy. We weren't a military power, nor a significant economic force. We were a curiosity, a small, young world among a sea of far older, more powerful civilizations. Most of the galaxy viewed us with a mixture of amusement and mild indifference, as if we were a species still struggling to find its place among the stars. The Galactic Coalition barely paid us any attention. After all, what harm could a handful of humans do, when stacked against fleets that could shatter entire star systems? But they didn't know what we were capable of. It began quietly, as all major shifts in history do. The Empire of Xalar, one of the most feared and ruthless forces in the galaxy, turned its eyes toward Earth. At first, it was just whispers, rumors from the fringes of the Coalition, where power struggles between empires and mercenary factions ran deep. But those rumors turned into something much more real, and soon, every government, every faction, knew that the Xalarians had set their sights on our planet. They weren't interested in trade or diplomacy. The Xalarians wanted something else, power. They wanted to send a message to the rest of the galaxy that no one was safe from their might, that even the smallest, most insignificant planets could be crushed under the weight of their empire. I was there when the first transmission came through. We had been waiting for it. It was almost ceremonial, an announcement of their arrival, their demands for unconditional surrender. The transmission was flawless, delivered in the cold, efficient tones of the Xalarian emissaries. They wanted us to kneel. They wanted to establish their dominance over Earth, as they had over so many other worlds. It was supposed to be simple. But that was the first mistake they made. Instead of the expected plea for mercy, instead of the political posturing we were known for, Earth did something the galaxy didn't expect. We simply said no. The response from our president wasn't elaborate, nor was it particularly passionate. It was calm, composed. We refused to surrender, was all he said. The transmission ended. Silence. For a moment, I thought maybe there had been a glitch in the communication network. Maybe it had cut off too soon, but then the Xalarians responded. Their leaders were livid, and their voice came through louder than any I'd ever heard, filled with disbelief, with rage. They demanded that Earth retract its statement, that we comply with the inevitable. Their fleets were already on their way. The subtext was clear: resistance was futile. The galaxy had long ago learned to cower before the Xalarian juggernaut, and Earth would be no different. We didn't flinch. In the days that followed, the Xalarian fleet appeared at the edge of our solar system, massive, terrifying. A dozen warships, each one larger than any of our cities, each one bristling with weaponry capable of vaporizing entire continents. They moved with purpose, like a predator eyeing its next meal. The council convened immediately, a hastily arranged summit of military advisors, government officials, and diplomats, all trying to figure out what to do. Some wanted to negotiate, to offer concessions, to submit in hopes of saving lives. Others thought we should prepare to fight, send our limited forces to meet them head-on. But our military was no match for the Xalarians. We were underdeveloped compared to the galactic powers, and even our most advanced weapons seemed like toys against their might. And yet we said no. Again and again, the answer was no. Not out of some blind defiance, but out of a quiet, calculated understanding that our survival was not going to come from submission. The leaders of Earth were not foolish. They knew the Xalarians would not back down easily, and they would not tolerate another insult. But there was something in their eyes, in their voices, that suggested they knew something the rest of us didn't. Something primal. Something deep. I had my doubts. How could we stand against such overwhelming force? How could we survive in the face of an enemy who didn't just want to conquer us, but to obliterate everything we were? How could any human hope to win against the might of the Xalarian Empire? But as I stood in that room, watching the cold, indifferent faces of our leaders, I realized they had already decided. The outcome was not in question. The galaxy might have underestimated us, but Earth was not the soft, naive species they thought it was. Earth was a death world, and we would not fall quietly. We would fight, and the galaxy would know us by our defiance. It was the only chance we had left. The days that followed Earth's refusal to bow before the Jalorians were tense. The world held its breath as their fleet moved steadily closer, their warships looming like ominous shadows against the backdrop of our sun. But no one seemed to know what to expect. The Jalorians had always been known for their military prowess, conquering planet after planet, each more devastating than the last, and now they were coming for us. The political leaders and military commanders scrambled to prepare, but it was clear there was no easy solution. Our military forces were outclassed. Our ships were primitive compared to the Zalorian armada, and our weaponry, while advanced for our standards, was little more than a nuisance to the invaders. The Jalorians could wipe us out in a matter of hours. We had no hope of winning a direct confrontation. Our only advantage was something no one could predict: our will to survive. As the days dragged on, it became clear that Earth wasn't going to just submit and go quietly into the night. We wouldn't cower under their boot. But what did that mean? What could we do? How could we stand up against an empire that had crushed entire civilizations? The truth was, no one knew. Not really. The coalition leaders, the most powerful species and empires across the galaxy, watched from the sidelines, waiting. Most thought Earth would bend. They assumed we would fall in line, just as all the other conquered planets had. After all, we were young, still in the infancy of our spacefaring age. They saw our defiance as nothing more than a fleeting moment of misplaced bravado. Jalor would come, and Earth would break. That was the assumption, anyway. But what the galaxy didn't understand was that there was something deep inside us, something instinctual, something that refused to give in. It wasn't arrogance, it wasn't pride. It was something far more dangerous: the human spirit. We didn't bend. We didn't break. In response to the Jalorian threat, the Earth's leaders made a decision that stunned the galaxy. They would not negotiate. They would not surrender. Instead, they would take the fight to the Jalorians in a way no one could have predicted. The challenge was made, not in words but in action. We would meet them in their own arena. A challenge one-on-one to settle the fate of the planet in the traditional manner of galactic combat. The Jalorians had always prided themselves on their warrior culture, on their gladiatorial games, where the strongest of the strongest battled to the death for the entertainment of the ruling elite. In those arenas where warriors from every corner of the galaxy were brought to fight, the Jalorians had never lost. They were conquerors. There was no race or species that could stand against them. But Earth wasn't asking for an army to fight. We weren't asking for a fleet to be sent. No, we sent one human. One volunteer, a soldier, a Deathworlder, someone who knew exactly what it meant to fight to survive. Someone who had fought and survived on our planet, where the very environment sought to kill us every day, and yet we still thrived. This soldier, one human among the galaxy's most brutal warriors, would face the Zalorian champion in their arena and either win or die. The decision was made quietly, without fanfare. The world's attention was on the impending Jalorian invasion, but in the background, arrangements were being made. Our fighter, someone with no notable military rank, no vast fame, was quietly chosen. She was a soldier, yes, but more than that, she was human. And that alone made her stand out. Humans didn't fight the way the rest of the galaxy did. We fought to survive. We fought not for glory, but because we had no choice. The Jalorians were caught off guard. They had expected us to beg, to plead for mercy. They had expected our leaders to bow and offer whatever they wanted in exchange for peace. But instead, Earth had chosen the most unlikely path. Instead of surrender, we chose defiance. And in that defiance, we would prove something. The Zalorians were furious. They could hardly comprehend what they were seeing. A human, one of the inferior species of the galaxy, challenging their most feared champion. It was unheard of. The very idea was absurd. They were used to crushing species, to watching entire civilizations crumble at their feet, but this time they faced something they couldn't understand. The humans of Earth weren't like other species. They didn't know how to give up. As the day of the challenge approached, the galaxy watched with bated breath. The Galactic Arena, a massive structure inside the heart of a Zalorian warship, had been prepared for the fight. The massive crowd, hundreds of thousands of spectators from countless species, would be present, waiting to see the spectacle unfold. No one had any illusions about how this would end. The Zalorian champion was a being of immense power, a monster in its own right, and yet humanity was offering only a single warrior in return. The question on everyone's mind was the same: could humanity even survive this? Could one person stand up to the might of the Jalorians, or was this just a desperate, suicidal attempt to delay the inevitable? No one had the answer, but in that arena, on that fateful day, the entire galaxy would learn what humanity was truly capable of. The day of the challenge arrived with an air of tension that could almost be felt in the atmosphere. The Jalarian fleet had positioned itself in orbit around Earth, their warships casting long, imposing shadows over our planet. The sheer size of their armada was enough to make anyone doubt the wisdom of our decision. We had no army, no fleet, nothing to fall back on but a single human volunteer. It was a gamble, one that could end in extinction, or something far more unimaginable. The Galactic Arena, a massive and imposing structure built into the heart of a Jalarian warship, was designed for the most brutal and deadly of contests. It was not a place for mercy, not a place for anything but pure, unrelenting combat. The arena had been used for centuries to determine the fate of worlds, and no one had ever dared to challenge a Jalarian warrior in live. The galaxy had seen countless species enter, only to fall to the might of the Jalarian combatants. Their warriors were unmatched, and their tactics were ruthless. The idea that a human, someone from a species still learning to stand among the stars, would challenge such a force was absurd. Yet here we were. The fighter chosen to represent Earth was an unassuming woman. A soldier with a background that seemed almost insignificant compared to the grandeur of the arena. She had no noble title, no fame that preceded her name. She was, in essence, one of the many who had lived through the harsh conditions of Earth, a planet where survival was a constant battle against nature itself. But that was exactly what made her the perfect choice. Earth's survival had always been defined by our ability to endure. Our planet might have been young in the eyes of the galaxy, but we had survived wars, environmental catastrophes, and even the ravages of our own species. We had been shaped by adversity, honed by the relentless challenges of our world. And in her, we saw our collective spirit resilient, unyielding, and ever ready to fight. The arena was designed to be a spectacle. The walls gleamed with the cold, metallic sheen of alien technology, and the ground was a harsh, unforgiving surface that would test the limits of any fighter. In the center of it all, a large platform stood, surrounded by an audience of thousands of spectators from every corner of the galaxy, species both familiar and strange, all gathered to witness what they assumed would be an easy victory for the Jalarians. The Jalarian champion, a massive, hulking figure that seemed to embody everything feared about their empire, waited in the center. The creature was a beast of war, clad in thick, jagged armor, its eyes glowing with a malevolent intensity. It was the very definition of a predator. The human fighter stepped into the arena, her movements calm, controlled. Her face was set in an expression of unwavering determination. The crowd fell into an expectant hush, waiting for the fight to begin. No one truly believed she could win. To them, this was little more than a formality. The Jalarian would crush her with ease, just as they had done to every other challenger before her. But as the first blow was struck, it was clear that this fight was not going to follow the script. The Jalarian champion moved with the speed and precision of a seasoned warrior, striking with brutal force. His blows were calculated, each one aimed at ending the fight as quickly as possible. But the human, our representative, was different from anything the Jalarians had faced before. She didn't fight in the traditional sense. She wasn't trying to overpower her opponent with sheer force. Instead, she relied on something that had always been humanity's greatest strength: adaptability. She dodged and weaved, her movements almost graceful as she avoided the champion's devastating strikes. Her steps were measured, her breathing steady, and she observed her opponent with an almost analytical precision. The Jalarian was relentless, but there was a flaw in his approach. He was used to crushing his enemies with brute strength, and that's exactly what he tried to do again and again. But Earth's fighter had learned the most important lesson of all. Survival wasn't about power. It was about knowing when to strike and when to retreat. The first few minutes of the fight were a blur. The champion's attacks were swift, but his arrogance was apparent. He thought this would be over quickly. He thought the human was nothing more than an insect to be crushed underfoot. But as the fight continued, it became apparent that he was in over his head. She was patient. She was waiting for him to make a mistake. And the more he pressed, the more mistakes he made. The Jalarian's strikes began to slow as he grew frustrated. He had underestimated his opponent. No, he had underestimated Earth. The very thing the galaxy had dismissed as weak was proving to be his greatest challenge. For every strike that missed, for every moment of hesitation, he lost ground. His strength, his speed, his viciousness, all of it started to turn against him. The crowd, initially silent, began to murmur. They had expected a quick victory, but the longer the fight went on, the more uncertain they became. The human fighter wasn't just surviving, she was learning, adapting, and biding her time. The Jalarian, once a creature of unshakable confidence, was beginning to show signs of fatigue, his movements growing more erratic, more desperate. The first crack in his armor appeared when he overextended on a particularly vicious strike. He was slow to recover, and in that moment, Earth's fighter seized her opportunity. She struck, not with brute force but with precision, targeting his weak points. The Zalorian staggered back, stunned by the unexpected blow. It was clear this wasn't just a fight. It was a turning point. The Zalorians might have the power, but we had something they couldn't account for: human ingenuity, resilience, and an unrelenting will to survive. The fight had shifted, and the tension in the arena was palpable. No one could believe what they were witnessing. The Zalorian champion, once the pinnacle of strength and brutality, was faltering. His movements, which had been so sure and unyielding just moments ago, now lacked the fluidity and power they had once had. It wasn't just that the human was surviving, she was making him work for every strike, forcing him to adjust, to struggle, something that none of the previous combatants had ever made him do. The Zalorians, known for their ruthless efficiency, were beginning to grow restless. Their champion, the very symbol of their empire's invincibility, was being challenged by a human, someone they had never even considered as a true threat. The whispers began, low at first, then growing louder. Could this actually happen? Could the champion of the Zalorian Empire fall to a species they had deemed inferior? The human fighter was still calm, her eyes never leaving her opponent. Her breath was steady, her body moving like a machine, each step calculated, every movement precise. Her every action seemed to be aimed at finding another weakness, another opening, as though she were dissecting the champion's fighting style piece by piece. This wasn't a desperate struggle for survival. This was methodical, planned, and it was beginning to pay off. The Zalorian's armor, which had seemed so indestructible just moments ago, was beginning to show signs of wear. The human strikes had been small at first, glancing blows aimed at pressure points and joints, but now they were more forceful, more direct. Each hit seemed to land with greater accuracy, each blow forcing the Zalorian back. It was a slow, painful realization for the champion. He was not going to win this easily. The crowd, initially silent in disbelief, began to murmur. The Zalorian champion was stumbling, his pride and arrogance giving way to confusion. He tried to recover, launching a series of devastating counterattacks, but they were wild, uncoordinated. The human fighter was too quick, too agile, evading his every move, waiting for the perfect moment to strike again. The Zalorian's frustration grew. He had faced countless opponents in this very arena, species of all kinds, and none had ever lasted this long. His armor was scarred now, the marks of the human strikes evident. His breathing was heavier, and the once perfect rhythm of his combat style was falling apart. The human, on the other hand, was still calm, still composed. She had not broken a sweat. She was focused on the task at hand, on wearing down her opponent, on forcing the Zalorian to make a mistake. And then it happened. The champion, in his rage, overextended himself once again, throwing a wild punch that missed by a mile. The human saw it coming, her body reacting almost before her mind had registered the move. She darted forward with incredible speed, sliding under his massive arm and delivering a crushing blow to the side of his ribcage. The sound of the impact echoed through the arena, and for a moment, there was silence. The Zalorian let out a grunt of pain, stumbling backward. His massive body lurched, and for the first time, there was a look of genuine doubt in his eyes. The crowd, who had been so sure of his victory, was now on edge. A strange murmur swept through the stands as they watched this unexpected turn of events. Could it be? Could this human actually defeat the champion? The Zalorian tried to recover, but it was clear now that he was struggling. His movements were sluggish, and his attempts to strike back were weak. The human had found the rhythm of the fight. She knew when to retreat, when to push, when to strike. The Zalorian, once the perfect predator, was now on the defensive. The balance of the fight had shifted, and there was no turning back. The crowd was no longer silent. The whispers grew louder, a wave of disbelief and shock rippling through the spectators. For the first time in history, the Zalorian champion was on the brink of defeat. It was almost too much to comprehend. The Zalorians had conquered worlds, enslaved species, wiped out civilizations. And now, here they were, watching their greatest warrior falter in the face of a single human. The Zalorian's pride, which had once been his greatest asset, was now his greatest weakness. He had underestimated his opponent. He had expected the human to collapse, to fall before his strength, just as every other challenger had. But humanity was not like the other species he had faced. We fought differently. We didn't know how to give up. And that's what made us dangerous. The human fighter pressed her advantage, pushing forward with relentless determination. She struck again, this time aiming for the Zalorian's neck. Her blow landed with sickening precision, and the champion let out a roar of pain. He staggered back, his legs buckling beneath him. His armor was now nothing more than a hindrance, a weight that slowed him down. The human was too quick, too skilled. She had found his weaknesses, and now she was exploiting them without mercy. The Zalarian tried to stand, his eyes wide with desperation, but it was too late. The human was upon him once more, her movements fluid, graceful. She delivered the final blow, an uppercut that struck with the force of a star's explosion. The Zalarian champion was lifted off his feet, his body crumpling like a rag doll as he fell to the ground. The arena fell into stunned silence. No one moved. No one spoke. The impossible had happened. The Zalarian champion, the mightiest warrior in the galaxy, had been defeated. The human, the species that had been written off as weak, as insignificant, had done the unthinkable. In that moment, the entire galaxy learned what Earth was capable of. It wasn't just about strength or power. It wasn't about weaponry or fleets. It was about willpower. It was about the unyielding spirit of a species that had survived against all odds. And now the Zalorians knew something they had never considered before. Humanity was a force to be reckoned with. The silence in the arena was deafening. It was as though time itself had stopped, the breath of every spectator held in suspended disbelief. The Zalorian champion, once thought unbeatable, lay motionless on the ground, his massive form sprawled across the cold, unforgiving surface of the arena. The human fighter stood over him, her chest heaving with exertion, but her expression was one of quiet focus. She had done it. Against all odds, she had defeated the most feared warrior in the galaxy. For a moment, no one knew how to react. The crowd, a mix of thousands of alien species, had been conditioned to expect one thing: victory for the Zalorians. They had seen this play out countless times before. But this was something entirely new. The impossible had happened, and they were all witnesses to it. The first sign of movement came from the Zalorians in the stands. At first, it was just a murmur, a ripple of disbelief that spread across the masses. The Empire's champions were never supposed to lose. The idea that a human, one of the lesser species in the galaxy, could defeat the greatest of them was inconceivable. And yet, here it was, undeniable, hanging in the air like a broken promise. The human fighter, her eyes never leaving the fallen Zalorian, didn't allow herself to bask in the moment. She wasn't here to prove anything to the crowd or to the universe. She had one mission, and it wasn't to take a victory lap. Earth had sent her here to send a message, to show the galaxy what humanity was capable of, and the moment her opponent fell, she made her way toward the edge of the arena, her purpose clear. But something had changed. The Zalorians weren't simply going to accept this loss. As the human turned, preparing to leave the arena, the air shifted. A low hum of energy vibrated through the platform. The Zalorian High Council, seated in their elevated box, had made a decision. They were not about to let this humiliation stand. As if to confirm their intent, a Zalorian commander, his features sharp and calculating, stood up, his posture rigid with authority. "You have won the battle, human." His voice echoed through the arena, carried by the alien technology. "But this victory will not stand. The game is far from over." The words reverberated in the stillness, and a surge of energy coursed through the platform. The human fighter froze, her senses heightened, but she didn't turn around. She knew this moment had been coming. The Zalorians were not known for their grace in defeat. A force field flared to life around the fallen champion's body, and the corpse lifted off the ground, suspended in midair by the energy field. It was a grotesque display, but it wasn't enough to scare the human. This wasn't the end. It was just the next challenge. The Zalorian champion's body began to glow, an eerie green light pulsing from beneath the surface of his broken armor. The energy from the field seemed to repair his wounds, knitting his body back together, as though the creature were being resurrected in front of their very eyes. The fighters from every corner of the galaxy had watched Zalorians use this technology before, but to see it used on their champion, well, it was more than just a matter of pride. It was a declaration. They would not let one human stop their empire. The body of the champion was now fully repaired, and the Zalorian, once defeated and broken, was standing again, his eyes blazing with renewed fury. His enormous form was even more terrifying now, a creature reborn in the image of vengeance. The crowd, initially stunned into silence, erupted into a roar of approval. The Zalorians were not about to let their power be questioned. The fight was far from over. The human fighter turned, eyes narrowed as she sized up the Zalorian once more. She had known this would happen. This wasn't a simple battle. This was about sending a message. The Zalorians were notorious for their need to dominate, and this would be no different. But she was ready. Earth wasn't just a world that survived, it adapted. And her training, her instincts, her very soul had been forged in that environment. Without a word, she stepped back into the center of the arena, her stance low and ready. The Jalorian charged, his every movement an embodiment of raw power, the ground trembling under his massive steps. His fists came down like meteors, but the human was no longer in a rush to engage. She knew the Jalorian's game now. He would fight in anger, in desperation, and that would be his downfall. The human sidestepped his first punch with surprising agility, ducking beneath his massive arm and slipping behind him. She struck out, landing a blow to his exposed flank. It was a small victory, but it sent a message. The Jalorian's movement faltered, and he swung wildly, his blows narrowly missing her as she danced around him. The fight that followed was brutal in its intensity, the human's movements a blur of precision, grace, and unyielding will. She had the advantage of adaptability, while the Jalorian fought with rage, each strike more desperate than the last. The energy in the arena surged as the human outmaneuvered the champion, forcing him to expend his strength faster than he could recover. But the Jalorian had the weight of the Empire behind him. He wasn't going to give up easily. He fought like a creature possessed, his every movement designed to crush her under the weight of his might. And yet she resisted. She fought not just for survival but for her world, for every human that had ever been underestimated. The human fighter's body was beginning to show signs of the toll the fight was taking. Her movements were slower now, her breath coming in labored gasps. The Jalorian was relentless, his attacks unyielding, and yet she held her ground, each dodge, each counterstrike, a testament to the strength of humanity's will. Then, in a moment of sheer brilliance, the human saw an opening. The Jalorian in his fury had left himself vulnerable, his armor slightly askew. She struck with everything she had, a single blow that shattered the Jalorian's defense and sent him sprawling to the ground once more. The audience went silent again, the shockwaves of disbelief coursing through the crowd. The champion, once more defeated, lay helpless before the human. This time, there would be no resurrection. This time, the Jalorian Empire had learned a hard lesson: humanity could not be broken. The arena remained eerily quiet, as if the entire galaxy was holding its breath. The Jalorian champion, once the terror of countless worlds, lay motionless at the feet of the human fighter. This was not a victory that could easily be dismissed, not one that could be swept under the rug. It wasn't just a defeat, it was a humiliation. The Jalorian Empire had seen their most fearsome warrior bested by a human, a species they had deemed primitive and weak, a race that they never thought would challenge their dominance. The reality of the situation was sinking in, and with it came the weight of their pride being shattered. The human fighter stood over the fallen champion, her body battered and bruised, but her gaze unwavering. She had proven that it wasn't just about the strength of a single individual, it was about the resilience of an entire species, the ability to push forward, to adapt, to survive against all odds. She had done what no one believed was possible. The challenge had been set, and Earth had answered in the most unexpected of ways. Yet this moment wasn't about glory. It wasn't about the accolades that would follow. It was about making a statement, and Earth had done so with a resounding force that would echo throughout the galaxy for centuries. The Jalorian High Council, who had been silent up until now, began to stir. Their seats creaked under the weight of their authority, but even they could not escape the implications of what had just transpired. Their empire had been built on the notion that no one, no species, could stand against them. Yet here was a human, standing tall in the face of their greatest warrior, having not just survived, but triumphed. It was clear now that the Jalorians were no longer the unquestionable rulers they had once been. One of the council members, a towering figure with dark scales and eyes that glowed with an unsettling hue, rose to his feet. His presence commanded attention, and the crowd fell into a hushed silence once more. His voice, deep and resonant, carried across the arena. This is not the end," he declared, his words reverberating in the minds of every creature in the stands. "This human may have defeated our champion, but we are not so easily cowed. If humanity seeks to challenge the Jalorian Empire, then let them understand this: our resolve is not as fragile as you think." The declaration sent a ripple through the spectators. The Jalorians, while stunned, were not ones to back down easily. The High Council had already begun their machinations, preparing to reassert their dominance. This defeat was an anomaly to them, a temporary disruption. They would retaliate, regroup, and strike again. The human's victory would not be the final word in this confrontation. But the human fighter, standing resolute in the center of the arena, showed no signs of fear. She had come to deliver a message, and she had done so with unparalleled clarity. Her eyes locked with the council members, unflinching. She had heard their threats, but they didn't matter to her. The truth had been laid bare. The Jalorians had underestimated humanity, and now, they were paying the price. It wasn't just the fighters in the arena who had been watching the spectacle. The galaxy itself was watching. News of Earth's victory had already begun to spread across the cosmos, and whispers of defiance were carried on the wind to every corner of the galaxy. The Galarians had been the great conquerors, the empire that had crushed all who dared to oppose them, but now they faced a challenge they had never anticipated. The defeat of their champion would not be easily erased from memory. It would be a turning point, a mark on history that would remind them of their vulnerability. The Galarians, realizing that this fight was not just about their champion's loss, but about the very challenge to their authority, began to stir in their seats. They were not accustomed to such resistance, and it was clear that their empire would have to reckon with the human spirit in ways they had never considered. The humans' resilience was more than a physical endurance. It was a symbol, a beacon of hope to those who had lived under the thumb of the Galarians, and it was this message that would spread far beyond the arena. The fighter took a step forward, her movement deliberate. She wasn't just leaving the arena, she was stepping into the unknown, stepping into a future where humanity would no longer be seen as a footnote in the galaxy's history. She had done what no one thought was possible. And now it was up to the rest of Earth to carry that torch, to prove that they, too, could rise above the expectations of the galaxy. The Galarians may have thought they were invincible, but humanity had just shown them otherwise. The victory of a single human had proven to the galaxy that Earth was not to be dismissed. It had proven that strength came not from power alone, but from the will to fight, from the will to survive, and from the belief that no matter the odds, humanity would stand its ground. As the human fighter left the arena, the Galarian Council's gaze followed her every step. They knew they had underestimated Earth, and they also knew that their empire had been irrevocably changed. The Galarians had tried to prove their dominance, to remind the galaxy that they were untouchable, but they had failed. And so, as the human fighter disappeared from view, the universe began to shift. The balance of power was no longer solely in the hands of the Galarians. They had learned a harsh truth, one that would reverberate across the stars for centuries to come. Humanity was no longer a species to be ignored. Earth had taken its first step into a larger universe, and there would be no turning back. The aftermath of the battle was a strange kind of stillness. The Galarian champion, once revered across the galaxy as the ultimate fighter, was now lying defeated in the center of the arena. His massive form, broken and battered, served as a testament to his race's hubris. But it wasn't just his body that had been shattered, it was their entire worldview, their belief that no one could stand against them. Humanity had done what no one else had ever dared to do. They had defeated the Galarian Empire's mightiest warrior. As the arena began to clear, whispers spread like wildfire, racing through the galaxies. News of the humans' victory reached every corner of the universe. On distant planets, the Galarian Empire's subjects, who had long been subjugated, felt a spark of something unfamiliar hope. They had watched in awe as a single human, unremarkable in the eyes of so many, had stepped into the arena and turned the tide of an entire empire. But the defeat was only one part of the story. The Galarian High Council, shaken by the event, had made their position clear. They would not allow this defeat to go unchallenged. They would not simply let humanity's triumph stand as the final word. The Council's declaration echoed through the galaxy. The Galarians would retaliate. They would rebuild their champion, and they would crush this rebellious spark before it could catch fire. Yet, despite their threats, a new reality was forming. The human fighter's victory was a symbol, a message that reverberated through the hearts of many who had long been oppressed. For centuries, the Galarian Empire had been an unchallenged juggernaut, their iron fists squeezing the life out of countless civilizations. But now, for the first time, their strength had been questioned. And that was something the galaxy would not forget. The human fighter, standing tall in the wake of the battle, knew that her victory was not an isolated incident. She had done her part, yes, but this was just the beginning. The fight wasn't over. Humanity's struggle was far from finished. There would be more battles to face, more enemies to overcome. The Galarians wouldn't simply let this go. But there was something different now. The galaxy had seen Earth's resolve. It had seen the will of a species that would not be so easily subdued. Back on Earth, the news of the victory spread quickly. But the world didn't fall into celebration. There were no parades, no grand gestures. It was almost as if the people of Earth understood the significance of the moment too well to take it lightly. This wasn't just a battle won, it was a declaration of war, an invitation to a larger conflict, one that would require every ounce of humanity's strength. The moment of triumph was fleeting, quickly overshadowed by the weight of the task ahead. The governments of Earth began to mobilize. Plans were drawn up, alliances forged, and military forces readied. It wasn't just about defending their home planet anymore, it was about taking their place on the galactic stage, about showing the Galorians and anyone else who might dare challenge them that Earth would not bow to oppression. The victory of a single human in the arena had sparked something far greater than anyone had expected. Earth had become a symbol of resistance, a symbol of hope for those who had been silenced, ignored, and crushed by the weight of empires. But the Galorians weren't done. They had been humiliated, and their pride had been wounded. The High Council would not take kindly to this defeat, and they would come for Earth, for humanity. The question was no longer whether the Galorians would retaliate, they would. The real question was how humanity would respond. The fighter who had defeated the champion returned to Earth as a hero, but she knew her role wasn't over. She wasn't the savior of the galaxy, nor was she the face of humanity's resistance. She was a symbol, a part of something much larger than herself. She had fought for something bigger than personal glory. Now she would fight alongside Earth's greatest minds and warriors to prepare for the coming storm. As the universe began to react, the power dynamics shifted. The Galorians had long been the unchallenged rulers of the galaxy, their empires stretching across vast star systems, their fleets powerful enough to reduce entire civilizations to ash. But now, for the first time in centuries, their empire was under threat. Humanity had proven that the Galorians were not invincible, that their hold on the galaxy was not as secure as they had believed. On distant worlds, those who had long suffered under the Galorians' rule began to take notice. They saw that a human had defeated the mightiest of their warriors. What would that mean for their own struggles? Could the same fight that had liberated Earth give them the strength to rise up? The spark had been lit, and the galaxy, for better or worse, would never be the same. The Galorians may have tried to ignore humanity for centuries, but now they were forced to reckon with it. And that reckoning would change everything. Humanity had said no in the most powerful way possible. The galaxy now knew what Earth was capable of. The question was no longer whether humanity could survive in the larger galaxy, it was whether the Galorians could survive the rise of a species that would never be silenced again. The fighter, as she stood with the weight of Earth's future pressing down upon her, understood something the Galorians had failed to grasp. Humanity wasn't about to lay down and die. They had proven that they could rise to the challenge, that they could adapt, that they could win. And now, with the galaxy watching, humanity's greatest fight was just beginning. The universe had underestimated them, and that would be their downfall. As the galaxy watches in stunned silence, humanity has taken its first step into a much larger universe. One battle is won, but the war is far from over. What's coming next will shake the stars themselves. But remember, this Earth has shown the universe what it means to never back down, to rise against all odds, and to fight for what's right. So the next time someone tells you that the impossible can't be done, just remind them of what humanity did today. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. The journey has only just begun, and trust me, you're going to want to be here for the ride. Stay tuned for more stories that'll leave you questioning everything you thought you knew about the universe. Sci-Fi Horizon stories where the impossible becomes inevitable.